No idea how to do like a video that plays and restream. That's interesting. I know how to do it in StreamYard.
I can do it this way.
Oh, I don't have any video clips. That's fine. Hi.
Hi. Oh, I need me. There I am. Here I am. Here's my face.
Okay,
I think
Ozzy
it's too
man.
early for. I think it's too early for our personalities for some people.
Yeah, it could be. It's we're
I guess it's
live
11 for
here.
you.
It is 11 for me. We're live here talking about things that I think both of us got pretty upset about or have discussions about, and that is the pitfalls of using offshore resources. So can you cue this up? There was a specific thing. Are you allowed to talk about the specific thing that kind of prompted this?
Yeah, so luckily when I post this, like just so everyone knows, whenever I post these things online of like, hey, an MSP reached out to me and told me about this crap that's going on, I do ask them like, hey, do you mind if I anonymize it and just put it out there for the ether? So they did let me talk about it. Essentially, they're in a situation where their Screen Connect server, the credentials got leaked online, and it was found. And I don't know the best way to phrase this, Jason. You can tell me, but some ethical hacking group that monitors dark web. They basically,
Huntress.
yeah. Well, actually, I'll give them a shout out. Dark Web IQ. I've
Okay.
never heard of them before.
Yeah.
But they reached out to the customer, and the customer did the total, the MSP, I should say, did the, oh, this is just a phishing thing, right? Like, shut the hell up and
Yep.
ignored their emails and phone calls. And then they reached out to their client and said, hey, you need to you need to get your MSP to talk to us. They called me and said, hey, have you heard of these guys? I called and I looked into it, and they're actually, from what I can see, they're just a young cybersecurity company.
Yeah, I'm looking at their page now, right? And it looks like their whole sales pitch is like their eventuality is they're going to try to monitor the dark web for your stuff to appear and then alert you early. So I'm sure a good sales tactic for that is like, hey, we saw this thing. Like in the
We
future, we
just
could
saved your
tell you,
ass.
yeah, we could tell you about these things in the future more if you pay us, which is, I mean, actually kind of neat.
It's totally cool, and I gotta say, it's a saving grace in this whole situation because they saw it so early that it actually never transacted. It never got sold.
That you know of.
Um, that we know of, right? Yes, there's a whole line of forensics and all that bullshit. But essentially, they got notified on a Friday evening, and it turned out to be one of their offshore employees. Key, variable in this conversation. Um, that's credentials leaked.
Yep.
And as we dove into it, I found out that the employee was recently reprimanded and starting accountability started to transact because he started making mistakes.
Yep.
Um, and right, there's a lot of variables that pop in your head. It's not fair to say the employee did anything malicious because you don't know, right? That's just not how we don't know, so we're not going to say. But you start to ask those questions of when they're offshore, do you manage them differently, or is this on management? Is this on leadership? Is this an
Yeah.
expectation problem, a design problem? There's 1,000 things you can ask. But all in all, just as a follow up, um, so far forensics from ConnectWise have shown no logs on the back end. It didn't even look like anyone really used it other than the initial login and did in the screenshots. So ConnectWise was extremely responsive to do some due diligence. So was the other toolset companies.
So I have so many thoughts on this, right? Like, so the first thing is I've definitely come across a lot of these offshore knock monitoring companies that they don't have a good solution for MFA. They encourage you actively to not create an account for every one of their employees, and then because they don't have a good way to handle MFA, they just want you to keep it off on that account.
Because
That's
they
not awesome.
also because they have high churn, right? So
Yeah.
they're going, shit, I don't want to have to tell you that we just fired your employee. We just
Yep.
want to give you a nameless soul.
Yep. 100%. Right. And the problem with that is I am privy to at least 3 full MSP breaches that was the vector of entry. That account was the vector of entry. It's not great, right? It's like, if you feel like you're filling out that insurance form and it asks if you have MFA on admin and you have to say yes, but ... offshore ... I feel like you're probably messing that up. Like,
Yeah,
it, in my risk model, that's pretty high offshore resource. Cause I mean, will lead us to the next part of this conversation, honestly, but that is, that is the weakest link to me.
Well, and I think even if you move beyond offshore, right? Let's just talk about outsourcing in general, because there's services out there where you can outsource in the United States to a nameless soul, and they have very similar practices. I'm not going to name names or anything, but right, I don't know if and we'll, like you mentioned, we'll get into the other topic here in a minute, but part of me wonders, Jason, is this a design problem or an enforcement problem rather than a people problem before you even move into the people issue?
Uh, I think it's a people problem, but not the offshore people,
Hmm.
right?
Ooh.
It's the people that allow that to exist, right? So it that's never okay. Like maybe in your RMM tools that will fly because those tend to, unless you use one of the tools that builds by tech, right? It tends to not be something that happens. But I mean, if they're logging into your PSA and they probably are to work tickets, like that's, let's not even talk about the security wiseness of that. That's 100% against your license agreement. Those are named resources, right? It,
That's an inner. Ooh, I didn't even think about that, Jason. Which is how many people do it just to save a buck.
oh, that's 100% of them. If I have to pay that $80 or $100 managed license for every one of those offshore resources, it suddenly starts to look a lot less good.
And I'd be a total hypocrite as well, because before we went live, when we're talking about whose Restream account we would use, I'm all messaging Wes like, "Hey Wes, can I use your Empath account? Because I don't want to go pay for one because I'm being a cheap bastard." We've all done this.
Yeah, I mean, it's 100%, right? Like I already paid for one, so it's, I think that's okay, right? Like in everyone cheats, right? Like and everyone just winks around it. I blame Netflix. uh,
Which they've locked down now, and I
yeah,
don't think the last time I watched Netflix.
I think there are like 3 Netflix accounts and they're just shared on the whole world.
You know what's funny though is I realized instantly with Netflix how much I valued it when they started to do the IP locking,
Hmm.
because the second they did that and it kicked me out, I don't think I've even thought about Netflix in the last 3
Oh
months.
yeah. Yeah, it's so that's an interesting argument, counter argument to kind of getting a little off topic to piracy there is that most of the people that pirate the content, it's not a lost sale. They
No.
wouldn't have bought it anyway, right? So like only some small percentage of people that can't find a way to do that would go out and do it. So that's why those companies don't look the other way. It's why the ConnectWises and crap of the world look the other way. To think that there's no technical way to solve that is silly, right? Like there are tons and tons of ways technical ways you can very much increase enforcement there. Impossible travel is a thing that everything can alert on these days, right? Like there's all sorts of interesting ways you can do that.
Well, and I mean, honestly, if we take that parallel, I know most of the RMMs out there and the ad hoc tools, they're by endpoint, they're not by
Yeah.
user. So
Yeah.
that's not even an argument in this conversation. Like we've checked that variable off.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have
So it's the
I don't know.
outsourcing companies, right? Like, hey, if you are an outsourced company, stop asking for generic accounts. It's not going to happen. Like
Yeah.
protect your business, because I know somewhere they're based in the U.S. and they just recruit offshore.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, that wasn't the primary discussion point I think we wanted to have here, right?
No,
Like we can dig into that. So the actual problem is looking where most of these companies actually do their offshoring to. It tends to be in, for better or worse, less developed countries. The Philippines, Costa Rica, India is actually getting less popular there because their cost
it's
of
getting
employees
expensive.
has gone up so much that it's not, the cost savings isn't big enough to justify it in most cases. But if you look at something like the Philippines, the average salary in the Philippines is $3,200 a year. The median salary is 13,000 ish, right? So you have to start to wonder how much money it takes to bribe somebody making that little money a year, right? Like it's a legitimate concern, right? Like when I had my CVEs against Automate, a couple years back, the bug bounty I got on that was $2,000. We out of curiosity shopped that to the dark web. $750,000 somebody would have paid me for that bug.
So if we do math, 13,000 a year median salary into 750,000, how many years of salary is that?
But it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't even have to be that. They're not going to pay obviously for credentials.
57 years.
Yeah, but say they pop somebody $1,500 for a set of credentials that you can use to log in and own an MSP, right? That's not a lot of money, right? Like if you let's put our business hats on, right? Like most MSPs, the total lifetime value of a client is high enough that if they spent $1,500 on acquisition, they're generally happy if they're a mid-market mature MSP, right? Like the effective cost per acquisition can be $1,500 because the lifetime value is, 50, 60, $100,000 on it, right? So that's not an unreasonable thing. The same thing exists for threat actors, right? Like stop discounting the fact that these are business people, right? Like they also have effective cost per acquisition, and they also have lifetime value of clients. And it's $1,500 to get a set of credentials for something that they're going to ransom for, $1 million, and 5% of people are going to pay. That's a no-brainer to them.
No, you're correct. You're 100% correct. The cash flow mechanics don't change whether you're good or evil. And this is where the conversation gets a little interesting because, I mean, let's be honest. I don't know if offshore is ultimately the problem if we start talking about malintent, because you could have a malintent employee in the US that you're about to, like we all see. I've seen this at so many MSPs, Jason, where there's that one engineer who has a bad attitude that has so much tribal knowledge that everyone tiptoes around him and doesn't want to just kick him out of the MSP.
Yeah.
And they tiptoe around him like there could be malintent, right? Like there could be some maliciousness that happens. But we have the beauty in the US to where, right, we have the legal system. Like if we can find the fingerprint, does the extradition problem and the lack of legal action and insurance, actually, before I even start that, I want to think the insurance side. If you found out your MSP had a breach and it was caused by an offshore resource out of the country, would insurance even cover that?
If you found out that the MSP had a breach and it was caused by an account with no MFA on it, then they likely won't cover it, because that is a gating. And it would be great to have Will or somebody on this call to talk, or even Wes to talk the insurance side. To my knowledge, that is one of the 4 or 5 gating controls, is that admin access requires MFA. Right. So presumably admin access to all of your clients' endpoints for sure requires MFA. And to have a policy, they checked yes for that box, or they wouldn't have gotten a policy issued.
Well, if you think of a tool like Screen Connect, though, and maybe it's matured since I've last used it, because I think last time I used it was 2016. Even if you don't have admin access, you still have the ability to ad hoc into every single machine. So it's not even an admin situation at that point. It's now you need to draw walls around your employees in who they can access. So it's almost going into a pod model to make sure that they don't have a gate around all of your clients. They just work on 10 of them. So now the offshoring thing doesn't really become as financially feasible because I need more resources to manage less customers.
Yep. And it also implies that there's not internal movement between teams there, right? There's so many pieces of this that just make that really hard to manage and monitor, right? It's like you don't have direct control of that. And the person whose throat you have to strangle, while they're a US resource, they're also not there managing it, right? So it's, we're playing a game of telephone as far as the management goes. And honestly, it is so far down that road. By the time that stuff is discovered, right, the time between when that credential would be sold and when that credential would be used is long enough that bad actor sells credential, bad actors quits because now, I don't need this. Sorry, well, I'm on your live stream. I just swore on your live stream. I don't care about swearing on mine. the they quit, right? It's like, oh man, you just paid me $3,000 for that credential. Like I'm gonna go find this job sucks. I'm gonna go find something else to do. 4 months go by before that credential is actually used by threat actors, right? Because it's bought by initial access brokers or something, and then it's just sold to somebody else for more money. So months go by, you can't even take it back to that person. There's no accountability there.
Someone asked me the question the other day, and it's completely gets off track. But is there a world where tools like Screen Connect and RMMs no longer get insured? Like if you
Yes.
use those tools, it's a target on your back.
Yeah, I think that world is coming. If nothing changes, that world is coming. And the unfortunate reality is that it has nothing to do with the security of those tools. I mean, okay, that's not true. It has a little bit to do with the security of those tools. It has to do with the fact that I've said it over and over again, that, and this will be our Gurkhan title. We'll have something along this. RMM tools are command and control with a marketing budget. Like they are literally the software that threat actors installs to turn your computer into a botnet or to manage it remotely. It is an RMM tool. Make no mistake. It has all the same features. It may even have less bugs than the RMM tool you're presently using. It just
It
doesn't have
has
a
a higher
marketing
budget.
budget.
It has a higher development budget, right? Because
Yeah.
you're actually making money off of that
Yeah.
RMM directly.
Yeah. So yeah, it's
I mean,
there. That world is coming.
is an immutable RMM and screen like ad hoc tool like possible?
No, it's not. I mean, and there are things you can do to
Or like
mitigate those risks.
a just in time deployment type
I
thing?
mean, Intune.
Yeah, true.
I mean, the problem with Intune is check-in frequency, right? So it's like you push a change down and it's eventually consistent. Just eventually just could be a day, right? So
But then you still have the problem of they breach your
yeah.
lighthouse access or your
No, yeah,
365 admin,
100%.
and then they just
Yeah.
push a PowerShell through
Yeah.
into.
Yeah, because you're that same knock tool that you're giving. So if you move it through Intune, that same knock tool that you're giving access to your RMM tool, now you're going to have give access to your tenant, right? Maybe you have a little bit better auditing there, so you can tell.
No conditional access type things.
Yeah, there are maybe a few more knobs there. Microsoft is a little bit stricter as far as those, account reuse and stuff. Like they don't play that game, so they're more likely to catch you. But in the end, it's the same problem, right? I can do that, and is more to the point, the immature MSP that's likely to give that non MFA credential down to the offshore knock. That same account probably has GDAP access to all their clients, assuming they can figure out how to set GDAP up, right? Like it, or it has access to the documentation platform that has all the passwords in it. Or, I mean, there's just so many variations of the same nonsense. Like maybe we don't allow the Buffalo jump, but man, if somebody gets into my password manager is a user with privilege, that's a bad day. It's at least I have auditing there to know what passwords are accessed, but it's still a bad day.
And it's one of those. I start to get really, not to play on words, but like I start to feel really bad for small MSPs where they're just getting off the ground. Like I think back in my day of like, okay, we were in a garage, there was like three of us, and I'm sitting there going, I need to add 20 because I'm a numbers guy. I have to add 20 to 30 clients on full managed services to hire my next resource.
Yep.
That's a tough thing to swallow if we get into the conversation of MSP being a commoditization at this point, where prices now need to come down a little bit.
Yep.
Because if it's coming down and I want to keep my margins, that means I need to be able to hire cheaper people because that's our biggest cost in our early days. I can't afford automation. I know a lot of people get upset at me for saying that, but there is a simple mathematics problem to where if I don't have enough cash, I don't have time to invest in automation. That
Yeah.
you just don't.
I think there's some fixes to that coming, but I 100% agree with that. There's
You just in the
yeah.
early days you have to have people because you need time, you need
Yes.
inventory of time.
Yes.
So if I am that inventory of time, you look at offshoring as the salvation to, oh my God, I'm working 90-hour weeks. I can hire somebody full time to at least catch that level one stuff. But like we're mentioning, now what type of bullseye does that put on my back? Or does it get to a point where insurance providers don't cover that and now you're handcuffing my business further?
Yeah, that's really tough. Like I mean, we're there now, even at our size, right? Like we're I'm 25 employees, and even now I have those same discussions that like, okay, we need to add services is starting to stress a little bit. Like we need to add another body. Like I have to get here to do it. And yeah, 100%, the draw to look for cheaper labor resources is there. And I
Well,
live
and
in
it'll
one of the
always be
cheapest
there.
areas of the country. Like literally, you can't. There's like, I live in the bottom 10th percentile as far as labor cost goes. So yeah,
Yeah, well, and there's a market bearing thing where if we are in a downturn economy and it starts to poke its head up this year, that businesses will want to save more money. That doesn't mean that they're going to be opposed
yeah,
to MSP. I don't get into that conversation. I don't believe in scarcity thinking. However, I always stress this, and you saw my video series on what I would do in a new MSP.
yes,
And I know there's controversy in that, but my whole objective with that was if you truly want to be competitive and you're a nice early young MSP, the only thing you have to compete on is pricing. Is
yeah.
that we're new, we're young, and we're eager.
Yep.
However, I don't have 100 people, I don't have 25 people, so I have to be cheaper. You just have to.
It yes. So when I look at reasons people leave their MSPs, even us, uh, price is an issue, but price is not the issue. The issue is value in customer service. In their the counterpoint, and again, we're going a little bit off topic
Yeah.
here. The counterpoint of that is you're a small young MSP. Even if you could keep, even if you were only 10% cheaper than everyone else, the customer service you're going to deliver in theory should be considerably better than the big giant PE backed monster that's, running metrics and, pushing as close to that SLA line as they can so they don't have to hire more resources, stuff like that. But I mean,
There's a lot in there. I agree.
I
Yeah.
would
You're gonna be
argue that if you're a young small MSP, that offshoring is the wrong choice because you're going to the end game of customer service at the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, you're trying to go to economy of scale faster. There's chicken and the egg dynamics
Yep.
here. At the end of the day, I think what we agree on is that there's this empathetic thing going on to where how do you manage this teeter totter and grow your business and make sure I don't have a bullseye on my back to leave the door open? Because I mean, even back in my days of Best Buy, right, we're hiring kids at 17,
Mm-hmm.
16. And we had incidences all the time where, this 17-year-old kid gets a laptop and he's real tempted to go look through all the photos. I mean,
Yep.
there was big articles about that. And I remember 2005 getting a phone call where everyone in Best Buy corporate had to have this very awkward meeting where someone found out that and this is public knowledge, you can Google this, where an employee had started to save
Oh
photos
yeah. You,
to
you
hard drives inside of we
yeah.
called them the precincts.
You could build a whole side hustle of blackmailing people from the photos on their laptops. Yeah.
Well, and I remember you would always hear like, because these are 50, and I'm not giving an excuse, right? These are 15, 16-year-old kids where they think it's funny or entertaining or cool because they haven't built that maturity
Yep.
into, hey, there's an ethics maturity. You got to kind of slap their hand to kind of develop them a little bit. Um, but even in that instance, you could never protect in a retail store someone copying a file. Like there's no
Yeah.
endpoints, there's no
Yeah.
protection. It's a people process that you need to manage. And the one thing that I started to recognize as people were leaving comments in my post is whether the employee is offshored or inshored or whatever you want to refer to it as, it's still a management problem.
Yep.
We don't have the proper management techniques to where you are a people manager first and foremost, which means there's a lot of verify, right? Trust and verify is all
Yeah.
built off of kind of a zero trust model, right? Like if we really rewind to like World War One and pre-World War One logic of I trust you, however, I'm still going to go look, and it has nothing to do with a culture problem, but it has everything to do with a QC process. Really, at the end of the day, right? Like, are we building the right mechanisms to uphold a standard?
Yeah.
But even trust and verify gets difficult. Of right, like I take a photo of my credentials with my phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or that if I go back to 2005 of that photo on your laptop, I take a photo.
Yeah. No, my wife, I mean, along those lines, my wife worked in a pharmacy where they had to scan a barcode to get into the pharmacy. and people were photocopying the barcode. So how did they fix it? They put a red background on the barcode because the red light of the barcode reader would see through the red, but the photocopier would copy it black. So I printed her a bunch of barcodes because I just read it with a barcode scanner and printed new ones. And I'm like, that's not, you haven't actually solved the problem, right? Like you have to, you need a different set of checks and balances than on those things than exists right now, right? The offshore resources, you have very few checks and balances with them, and you need to and I don't think either of us are necessarily saying evil, bad, don't use it. I'm saying that these are things that need to be considered before you make those decisions.
Well, or do you go to a knock that's in an office in the middle of
Yeah.
Kentucky where no phones are allowed and you
Yep.
go government on it, right? Like the CIA, they have iPhones with no cameras.
Yeah.
That's why BlackBerry had a contract with the government for so long, because they were the only ones that able to produce a phone without a camera.
The call center. So even back in the day, right? So I have a large client that we still service to date, and so that's how I know some of my cell. Like I can tell you openly that a SIM swap, 3,000 on T-Mobile, Sprint, AT&T, Verizon's 5,000. It's because it's a little bit harder to find somebody to bribe to do it, and they have a little better security. But even back in the day with our customer that bought that, we would only work with a call center offshore. We were working with one in Costa Rica. I got to go down there and see it and be down there. We would only work with a call center that allowed no electronics at all on the floor. Right. And we audited that. We sent somebody down there occasionally, sometimes without even telling them we were coming, to audit the fact that no cell phones were available on the floor. They weren't even allowed paper. They got like, if you've ever taken you've probably taken a Pearson VUE test at some point or another, or some sort of like where they give you that little like erasable whiteboard for you to write on because you can't write anything permanent. That's all they could have.
So here becomes the thought experiment then, Jason. If you are in a situation where you have to find cheaper resources, what is the steps or the requirements that an MSP needs to take in order to do it and at least cover the majority of their bases?
I would want the
And we can think in perfect world scenarios.
Yeah, I would want the document from the company as to what their security plan is and how they prevent malicious actors from doing that, right? Because do they not allow any sort of writing device or anything on the floor? Do they limit outbound access from the computers, right? Like, do they limit ways that they can spray or deal with that password? It like I want the documentation on what they say they're going to do, and I'm going to want some verification occasionally. Like I'm going to want the company I'm contracting dealing with the offshore to provide me an audit report indicating they're doing it. Because then honestly, I can't directly protect against that risk, but I'll tell you what, if then I get evidence that I'll finish there. Then if I get evidence that one of your people did this, like you've showed me the controls and the audits that you said this wasn't possible and now it happened, right? So I would want to contractually protect, you are liable if one of your downstream employees maluses my data. Like you are flat out liable, and I'm coming at you as the outsourced knock team to do that. You can't just wave your hands and go, oh, limitations of liability, blah, blah, blah. No, you are not moving that risk to me. You're going to own it.
Well, and then they need to have some level of like the no warranty policies bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And the no extradition type policies, or using some type of a broker. And I think that's where the legalese starts to come into place. But if we play that forward, and I'm a guy that's building a call center for MSPs in some third world country, or even I've seen South Africa being more and more
Me ttoo.
popular. That means my costs are going up. Why? Because that means I can't have bring your own device. That means
Yep.
I'm going to have terminals that they log into. So that means they sit down at their computer at the call center and they remote into my desktop wherever I put it. And all of those functions mean now I can't split a resource between 2 or 3 MSPs, which we know they're doing, and they say they're not, but we know they're doing.
They're 100% doing it.
Right. So now my cost will go up, which means my price of offshoring will go up. So where before it was $10 an hour, now it's getting closer to probably 15, $17 an hour,
Yeah.
which why don't I just go hire a kid in high school and put him in my office anyway at that point?
Yeah. And that's where that's the nut of it. That's where you get to, is that like all of these methods you use to try to make this cheaper all also have costs associated with them. And I was literally just having a discussion with one of my sales guys this morning about a client that wants to go out and procure their own stuff because they can get it 10% cheaper. And it's like, my argument with that is the same as the argument with this, is you're not considering the total cost of ownership, including all the risk associated with it, right? Like, if you can't protect away that risk, I can tell you definitively, almost definitively. I don't want like to speak in definitives when insurance is involved because I get really cranky about it. But I can tell you that I have definitely seen instances where, if you checked on that little box, you had MFA and you don't have MFA on that account and you get popped because of it. Yeah, you're done. Like, at the very least, it's going to be a long drawn out legal fight. Maybe they pay you something, but it's not going to be a good day for you.
So path of least resistance, then, if I take the diet approach to that, it's that offshore resource. You need to really do your checks and balances that they're your employee and
Yeah.
that you can have the right protocols in place
Yep.
to where they can't do bring your own device first and foremost,
Yep.
right? Like, and that's what a lot of them are doing lately. I know a little bit about this scenario, and I can tell you right now, they did not work in a call center. They worked from their own
They work
home
from
with their
home.
own
Yep.
laptop.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if I was doing it, I'd want to hire directly, right? Like, I would use a
An
place.
employer of record service.
Yeah, I would use a service that gets me an employee, not a service that does an employee. And maybe there's a PEO involved, so I don't have to figure out how to pay the taxes and stuff for them,
Yeah.
right? Like, but they're my
Which that's more time
employee.
and cost.
Yeah, they're my employee. They can't, either I'll send them hardware or they can BYOD. I'd probably send them hardware, but they're 100% talking to an AVD, right? They're 100% talking to some sort of virtual desktop up top. And as a matter of fact, I would likely enable screen recording on that for at least some percentage of the time they're on it, so that I could go back and review and audit, what is this resource actually doing? I am not typically a big fan of employee monitoring in that way, but that's going to force me to have no choice, essentially.
Yeah, and that's where my post kind of got into the whole, a culture is built off of an environment of trust. So the manager of that person, right? Because it's still a person at the end of the day. And I think Rob Chaffee had put something in my post about whether they're offshore or inshore, you need to treat them the same way you would treat any other employee.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do that, you need to do that for all of your employees, because like we're talking today, it could be that one employee that you're about to fire and he knows you're being fired. I mean, I've seen this at my MSP where there was a CFO about to be fired, and we got alerts that at like 1 a.m. he was copying all of his files to his hard drive. Right? It's no different in those scenarios.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to do that with an employee over in South Africa, I need to do that with an employee in Michigan, in Ohio, in California, wherever the hell they live. However,
Yeah.
you need to talk to them that has nothing to do with them as a relationship. This has everything to do with insurance, with liability.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh.
I mean, it does. Yeah. I mean, that's a thing, right? Like, yeah. I mean, all of those things need considered.
You want to elaborate on what SACE and virtual environment, and you want to go through
Yeah,
what Dean's
right.
talking
So
about?
he's asking, man, I forget Dr. Zoidberg's actual name, so we're gonna just call
Dean?
him Zoidberg. Oh, it's Dean. Okay. I guess I didn't put 2 and 7 together. Yeah. So SaaS solutions are essentially tunnel-ish based, VPN type things that are often used to do zero trust stuff. And then, MDM, obviously you can manage the mobile device. That's mobile device management, right? So he's saying, well, what if you went to a zero trust model where they have to use a known device to log in, and then you manage that? It's the only way to get to your virtual environment. I'm seeing a good amount of mature MSPs start to put the control plane for some of their things, if they run it on-prem, behind things like Cloudflare tunnels or some other, SASE solution, just to try to limit internet access to them. And that would predicate that you obviously bring them into that domain. I don't know that it really changes the calculus there very much, because, the threat here is largely credential misuse and credential reuse. I think you would actually have a lot more effective time rotating that password. If you're really going to create an account with no MFA, you're going to be rotating that password like daily. right? Like, and it's going to be 20 characters long with good entropy, right? And when they get in that day, here's the password for today. And that, so then if they steal it, the blast radius is literally one day. And none of those, we live in a world right now, and I'm knocking, where the threat actors aren't acting on stuff quick enough. Like you could rotate it probably weekly or monthly right now, and you would likely still be okay. But I would rotate it even more frequently than that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't. I honestly, I just wouldn't use that no MFA shared account. That's the reason I would not use those things.
Yeah, and I don't. Again, the virtual desktop thing, right? Like going back to terminal life, which is funny because we tried so hard to get away from terminals, and now we're going back to terminals
For like the ninth time. There's just it's a pendulum that swings back and forth between centralized and distributed, honestly.
Well, yeah, eventually we're just going to go back to we're going to go back to on-prem because it's just going to go, oh, cloud sources have just gotten too expensive. We can save money and we can capitalize this. But until that day where we decide to go back and relearn our mistakes all over again, it still doesn't help I only make 15,000 a year and I have an opportunity to make 10 years of salary by just handing over this password and MFA token.
Yep. And you, like, in the end, it all comes down to the ethical considerations of the people that you are hiring to do it. And it's really hard to scale that perfectly.
Now, I will say, if you take care of those employees and you probably manage them correctly and they're happy to work with you and you're paying, like if you're paying them $4 an hour and the average salary is $4 or $5 and you're underpaying them, they're probably not going to be happy. Now, if you treat them right, if you're paying them so our video editor in the Philippines, I'll say it, right? He makes $12 an hour. That's
good money for the Philippines.
And that guy works his ass off. And you know what? I love that employee just like any other employee I've had thousands of employees in my career at this point. He works hard and we reward him and we pay for his benefits. And that I had a conversation with him, Jason, where he literally goes, you know what? I want to tell you, Kyle, that my family makes fun of me because I'm rich.
Yeah.
He's not going to sell his credentials.
No. I mean,
he's going, shit. The Kyle gives me raises regularly. We hang out. He lets me take Fridays off. He lets me have holidays off.
Yeah. Shockingly enough, when you treat people like people, they tend to be happier.
They tend to go, you know what? I could make 2 years of salary, but what happens in 2 years? Kyle's probably going to be paying me more money. It's not worth it.
Oh, they do help desk. Yeah. Dean works for a company that does this, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. Or he's advising them, or I don't know the total.
Yeah, 100%, right? Like Wayne and I have argued, people, process, technology, and I've argued back and forth, like whether or not people and process could or should be reversed or could or should be equal. Right. But it seems like we constantly try to go back to technology solutions to things that aren't technology problems. They're people problems.
I've quoted you so many times, man, of you can't tool your way out of a problem.
Yeah.
It comes down to that linchpin of if you don't like, and I hear this all the time, and you've probably heard it, Jason, too, of MSP owners that go, I don't like managing people.
I don't like managing people. Guess what? People suck. I love my people, but people suck. Get over it. It's life, right? Like if you don't want to manage people, go back to being an individual contributor.
There's an interview that Elon Musk, I'm not a huge fan of him, but I loved what he said, where they asked, like, tell us about the day in your life as an owner of Tesla or running Tesla. And he goes, well, I'm like the janitor. I do everything that everyone else doesn't want to do.
Yeah.
And that is what being a business owner is. And a long time ago, I even myself learned that if you are able to be that quick start individual to get something moving, you really delegate the management of what you get moving. And that kind of becomes the differentiator. If you don't like managing people, that's fine. You need to get to a size to where you can hire somebody that can do it for you.
Yeah.
And until that day, and by the way, you're going to hire that person to do it for you, and they're going to suck, and they're going to make mistakes, and you're still going to have to manage it, and you're going to have to manage them to manage it.
Yep.
It never goes away.
Nope. Even now where I've gotten to the point where I can leave for 3 weeks and come back to only semi-grumpy Matt, it's still the case where I have to manage Matt. Sorry, Matt. and I have to manage occasionally, skip level to people below him. I have to manage Brett. I occasionally have to skip level to people to below him. Right. It doesn't go away, and it gets easier and it gets better. But in the end, yeah, you still have to deal with people.
And I think that's kind of where we kind of come to a head on this whole conversation of no matter where you hire this individual, you're going to have to manage them. You're going to have to watch what they're doing. You're going to have a QC process,
Yep.
and you're going to have to talk to them.
Yep. Okay. So we've rambled for 40 minutes on this topic now. Any final thoughts?
Real quick, Zoidberg asked me what was the most highest point of shrinkage at Best Buy. It was people, 100%. And honestly, when we did our yearly inventories, we found it was people walking things out the back door.
Ooh.
It was never theft.
Yeah.
And I can say that at this point because it's been 15 years since I worked at Best Buy, but
they had the best.
Yeah.
They had a really good loss prevention. I bet you that's not true anymore. They had a really good loss prevention department for a while, but then there were a couple of lawsuits around that, so everyone just kind of gave up on it.
Well, because what would happen is this actually happened at one of my stores up in Santa Cruz in California, Northern California. The employee that was loss prevention didn't try to interact, right? Because there's the don't stop policy. But they literally tried to get out of the way, and they got stabbed by the person running out by a pen. And that employee got fired and then did a lawsuit. And he's like, dude, I literally moved out of the way and still got hurt. But that's kind of where, again, I think you and I had this conversation on some other topic of there is a point when you become a big enough company to where the law makes you do some things that it's a little weird.
Yeah. I mean, that we had that in a different aspect, that entire conversation the other day somewhere else that we won't drag up here. But yeah, at scale, peopling is hard. And yeah,
especially across states, across country lines, across it's anywho. No, that's my last thing. Other than that, Dean and Heath, I appreciate it. And then Jason, let's do this
I mean, again, my point here isn't to tell you offshore bad. Offshore can be great, right? But you really need to consider, you need to have good process in place, and you need to make sure that the people you're hiring offshore or the people you're hiring to manage them are good people, because otherwise you can't, again, to say it again, you can't tool your way out of this problem here. If you got a company that's treating their employees downstream like garbage, don't be surprised when they start to stink.
That's as simple as this whole thing is.
Yeah. Okay.
It's simple in theory, pain in the ass in execution.
Yep, 100%. Okay.
So,
well, your dog wants your attention, so we will wrap this up now. And it was great chatting with you. We'll do another one sometime on something else.
Ooh, spoiler alert! It's going to be on FUD.
Sure. Yes, it's going to be on the terrible way people sell things. So, okay. Awesome.
All right, man.
I will talk